The first thing I noticed was that my wife had deleted our family calendar, and somehow that felt worse than finding lipstick on a shirt. I was standing in the kitchen staring at my phone, thumb hovering where birthdays and school pickups used to be, feeling a pressure build behind my eyes that had nothing to do with tears. It was early December. The house was quiet in that fake, waiting way it gets before the holidays, when everything looks calm but feels wrong. Outside, the inflatable reindeer she insisted on buying last year leaned sideways in the yard, half deflated, like it had given up before the season even started. My name is Daniel. I'm 38. I work in logistics for a regional distributor, the kind of job where you learn how to plan for problems before they happen. For 12 years, I thought I was good at that at home too. My wife, Emily, is 36. We have 2 kids, a mortgage, a shared credit card, or at least we used to share things. Emily got a new job in August. Marketing firm downtown. Glass walls, exposed brick, people who call meetings sessions and drink at lunch without hiding it. She said it was her chance to finally be seen. I told her I was proud. I meant it. I even watched the kids more so she could stay late, network, whatever that meant. At first she came home excited, talking fast, laughing. Then she came home quiet. Then she started coming home late. She said it was the commute. Then deadlines. Then client dinners. When I asked questions, she said I was interrogating her. When I stopped asking, she said I didn't care anymore. I learned quickly there was no right response, only wrong timing. The calendar disappearing wasn't a glitch. I checked the shared account. It was intentional. Emily had removed me. That night, she didn't come home until after midnight. I was awake on the couch, TV muted, pretending to scroll. She smelled like a hotel bar. Not perfume, something sharper. When she saw me, she paused like she'd walked into the wrong house. You didn't text, I said. She dropped her bag, didn't look at me. I didn't think I needed permission. That word stuck. Permission. Like I was a guard, not a husband. I didn't argue. I asked if she was okay. She laughed, short and dry, and said I always did that, turned everything into a problem. Then she went upstairs and locked the bedroom door. We had never locked doors from each other before. The next morning she acted normal. Too normal. Made coffee. Kissed the kids. Told me we should talk later, like she was scheduling maintenance on a machine she no longer wanted to use. I spent the day at work replaying the last 6 months, looking for the moment I missed when my marriage became optional. By the time I got home, the kids were gone for the weekend at my sister's, something Emily had arranged without telling me. She said we needed space. We sat at the dining table that night with no candles, no warmth. She folded her hands and said she needed honesty from me. That was when I knew whatever was coming had already happened. She asked how I felt about redefining marriage. She said people evolve. She said love shouldn't be a cage. Her voice was calm, practiced, like she'd rehearsed it with someone else. I asked her if there was someone specific she was thinking about. She didn't answer right away. She looked at me the way you look at a stranger who's about to slow you down. And in that pause, before she said anything at all, I realized I wasn't about to lose my wife. I had already lost her. I just didn't know yet how far she'd gone, or how much she thought I would tolerate, or how dangerous it would become once I stopped playing the role she needed me to play. She said his name like it was nothing, like she was asking me to pass the salt. Ryan, she said. He works with me. I didn't move. I didn't react. I felt something tighten in my chest, not explode, not shatter, just lock in place. Ryan, a name I had never heard, which meant he had already existed for a while. I asked how long. She shrugged. A few weeks. Maybe more. Time feels different when you're finally being honest. That word again. Honest. She used it like armor. I asked if they were sleeping together. She looked annoyed now, like I was slowing the conversation down. That's a narrow way of framing it. I stared at her. I wanted to shout. I wanted to flip the table. Instead, I heard myself say, "Have you had sex with him?" She sighed. Yes. The sound that came out of my mouth wasn't a word. It was air leaving a punctured tire. I felt stupid for not seeing it sooner, for thinking I could outwork distance. That patience was the same thing as loyalty. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. This is why I didn't want to tell you. You make it dramatic. I asked if she planned to stop. She shook her head slowly. No, I think this is something I need. And I think you should try to understand that. There it was. The expectation. The assumption that I would bend. That I would absorb it, adapt, make room for the wreckage and call it growth. She said she didn't want a divorce. She said she loved me, just differently now. She said open marriages worked for people who were emotionally mature. She said jealousy was a learned response. She said she didn't want to lie anymore. I asked if Ryan knew about me. She smiled. Of course. He respects that I'm married. I almost laughed. Almost. I told her I needed to see her phone. Her expression changed instantly. The calm cracked. Why? Because I don't trust you. That's your issue, she said. Not mine. I stood up. My legs felt steady, which surprised me. If you want me to even consider staying in this marriage, I need the truth, not the version you polished. She hesitated. Too long. That was enough. I went upstairs and packed a bag, not for me but for her. Clothes from the closet, toiletries from the bathroom. I moved quietly, methodically. She followed me, shouting now, saying I was overreacting, saying I was trying to control her, saying this was exactly why she needed freedom. When I carried the bag back downstairs, she laughed. A sharp, disbelieving sound. You think you can just throw me out? I think you should leave, I said. Tonight. She told me she wasn't going anywhere. She told me the house was half hers. She told me I couldn't handle a modern relationship, and that was my problem to work through. I opened the front door and set the bag outside. She stared at it, then at me, like she was recalibrating. You won't actually do this, she said. You need me. That was the moment something in me went quiet. Not numb. Clear. I needed the woman I married, I said. I don't know who you are. She grabbed her coat and stormed out, still yelling, still certain this was temporary, still convinced I'd call her back before morning. I locked the door and slid down against it, my back to the wood, my hands shaking for the first time all night. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Hey man, this is Ryan. We should probably talk. I didn't answer Ryan's message right away. I stared at the screen until it dimmed, then set the phone face down like it might start talking on its own. The house felt different without Emily's noise in it. Too clean. Too still. Like a place after something bad has already happened and no one's called it in yet. I poured a drink I didn't want and sat at the kitchen table where we'd planned birthdays and vacations. My hands were steady again. That scared me more than the shaking had. Ryan texted again 10 minutes later. Polite. Careful. He said he didn't want drama. He said he respected me. He said Emily was having a hard time and he didn't want anyone hurt. That last line almost made me throw the phone across the room. I asked him where he was. He sent an address without hesitation. A condo downtown. New build. I knew the area. Close to Emily's office. Too close to be a coincidence. I didn't tell him I was coming. I didn't tell anyone anything. I grabbed my jacket and drove through empty streets, my mind running faster than the car. I wasn't going there to fight. I wasn't even angry in the way people expect. I wanted to see him. I wanted to understand what kind of man looks at a married woman with kids and decides he's earned a seat at that table. His building had a doorman. I walked past him like I belonged there. Confidence is mostly timing. Ryan opened the door barefoot, wearing jeans and a soft smile that dropped the second he saw me. Daniel, he said, like we were already on a first-name basis. He was taller than me. Fit. Early 40s maybe. The kind of guy who'd aged well and knew it. The living room behind him was neat, expensive, carefully empty of anything personal. I didn't invite you, he said. I know, I said. But you texted. He stepped aside after a second, more curious than threatened. That told me a lot. We sat across from each other. No drinks offered. No small talk. He said Emily had told him things were complicated. He said she'd been unhappy for years. He said he didn't mean to step into a marriage. It just happened. I asked him if he loved her. He smiled again. That same practice calm. I care about her. I asked if he knew about the kids. Of course, he said. I'm not a monster. That word landed wrong. Like he thought monsters were loud and obvious. I told him she'd moved out for the night. His expression flickered. Just a crack. She didn't mention that, he said. I asked how long it had really been going on. He hesitated, then said, since September. That was 3 months longer than she'd admitted. 3 months of lies layered on top of lies. I stood up. You can have her, I said. But you don't get my silence. He frowned. What does that mean? It means you should pay attention to how this ends. I left before he could respond. When I got home, my phone was full. Missed calls from Emily. Texts swinging between rage and panic. She said Ryan told her I'd threatened him. She said I was humiliating her. She said I was going to regret this. I didn't reply. Instead, I logged into our shared accounts. All of them. Banking. Insurance. Cloud storage. I wasn't snooping. I was inventorying damage. That's when I found the email she forgot to delete. A forwarded message from HR. Subject line marked urgent. It mentioned a conflict of interest, an internal review, and Ryan's full name, attached to a complaint that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with how he treated married women at work. I sat back in my chair and felt the first real emotion of the night rise up. Not rage. Focus. Because for the first time since this started, I understood something Emily didn't. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about leverage. I slept for 3 hours and woke up clear. Not rested. Clear. There's a difference. Rest makes you soft. Clarity sharpens you. Emily came back mid-morning like she'd never left, keys loud in the door, footsteps heavy, daring me to say something. She looked wrecked but angry about it, like exhaustion was an inconvenience I'd caused. She dropped her bag and told me we needed to talk now, not later, not after coffee. Now. I told her I already knew about September. She froze. Just for a second. Then she masked it with offense. Ryan told you things. Of course he did. I told her I'd seen the email. That landed harder. Her face drained fast, the way people look when the floor disappears under them, but they're still standing. She asked what email. I didn't answer. I just watched her do the math in her head, counting mistakes she couldn't take back. She said I had no right to go through her accounts. I told her she had no right to turn our marriage into a side project. She started crying then. Not loud. Controlled. Tears she could stop when needed. She said I was trying to destroy her life. She said I was punishing her for being honest. She said I was abusing my access to hurt her. I didn't raise my voice. You already hurt yourself, I said. I'm just done protecting you from it. She asked what I wanted. That question used to mean compromise. Now it meant terms. I want the truth, I said. All of it. No framing. No therapy language. Just facts. She sat down slowly, like her legs had finally given out. She admitted Ryan wasn't just a coworker. He'd been her mentor. He'd helped her get the job. He'd pushed for her promotion. He'd told her she was undervalued at home, that smart women outgrow domestic lives, that some men need to be managed, not consulted. I asked if she believed that. She didn't answer. I asked if she'd told him about our finances, our debts, the equity in the house. She said he liked to understand people fully. I felt something cold move behind my eyes. I asked if she'd ever planned to leave me. She said she wanted options. That word again. Like this was a subscription she could cancel when bored. I told her I was filing for divorce. She laughed, high and panicked, said I was bluffing, said I'd never risk the kids, said judges hated men who couldn't handle open arrangements, said Ryan had lawyers who specialized in modern family law. I told her Ryan's name was already on an internal complaint. That shut her up. I told her I wasn't the one who'd made this dangerous. I told her she had exactly one chance to stop lying to me, because the next version of this conversation wouldn't be private. She stared at me like she was seeing a stranger, finally realizing I wasn't reacting anymore. I was deciding. That afternoon I met with a lawyer. Quiet office. No promises, just probabilities. He told me infidelity still mattered if you documented it right. He told me financial disclosure was leverage. He told me the kids would be the center of everything, whether Emily liked it or not. On the way home, I got a call from Ryan. He didn't sound calm anymore. He said HR had contacted him. He said Emily was unstable. He said he wanted to clear the air. He said we were adults and could keep things from getting ugly. I told him it was already ugly. It just hadn't made noise yet. That night, Emily slept in the guest room. She locked the door. Old habits. I sat alone in the dark living room, scrolling through copies of emails, messages, calendar invites that weren't work-related at all. Hotel names. Expense codes. Patterns you only see once you stop wanting to be wrong. My phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. This one wasn't polite. Daniel, you don't understand what you're starting. Back off. I stared at it for a long time. Then I smiled for the first time in days. Because now I knew something else too. They were scared. And that meant the next move mattered more than any move before it. The message stayed on my screen while the house slept. I didn't reply. Silence does more damage than threats when someone's already afraid. I put the phone down and sat there until the sun came up, letting the fear on the other end ferment on its own. By morning, Emily was gone. No note. No text. Just her laptop missing and a charger ripped out of the wall. I checked the kids' room out of habit, even though I knew they weren't there. Empty beds always feel like accusation. At work, I told my boss I'd need flexibility for a while. I didn't explain. I've learned that the less people know, the less they can twist. He nodded. He's divorced. He didn't ask questions. At lunch, I met my lawyer again. I brought printouts. Not emotions. Emails, timestamps, expense reports, screenshots. He raised his eyebrows once, then stopped. That was a good sign. He told me to slow down, to let the process work, but he also told me to keep documenting everything and not to engage directly anymore. I told him that part was already over. That afternoon, Emily called from a blocked number. I answered. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She sounded strategic. She said we needed to reset, that things had gotten out of hand, that Ryan was spiraling and making mistakes, and that we could still fix this if I'd just stop pushing. I asked her where she was. She said that wasn't relevant. I asked if she'd told Ryan about the email. She paused. He figured it out. I asked if she'd told him about the kids. She said he was under a lot of stress and didn't need more pressure. That was when I realized she wasn't choosing between us anymore. She was managing fallout. I told her to have her lawyer contact mine. I hung up before she could respond. An hour later, my credit card company called. Fraud alert. A large charge at a boutique hotel out of state. I declined it. Then another charge. Then another. I froze the account. 5 minutes later, Emily called again, furious now, saying I was financially abusing her, that I was trying to trap her. I reminded her she had her own accounts. She said Ryan told her I was doing this to force her back. Ryan. Always Ryan. I got an email from HR that evening. Neutral language. Thanking me for providing information. Letting me know the matter was under review. No promises. I forwarded it to my lawyer and shut the laptop. That night, someone knocked on the door. Not loud. Careful. Like they didn't want neighbors involved. I checked the camera on my phone. Ryan stood there alone, jacket on, jaw tight, looking smaller than he had in his condo. He checked his watch, then the street, then knocked again. I didn't open the door. My phone buzzed immediately. Daniel, he texted. We need to talk. Man to man. I sat on the couch and let him knock himself out. After 10 minutes, he sent another message. You think you're in control. You're not. I typed back one sentence. You came to my house. That tells me everything. There was no reply after that. But later, close to midnight, I got a notification from my cloud storage. Emily had logged in. She wasn't trying to hide anymore. She was trying to delete. And as I watched files disappear one by one, I understood something that locked everything into place. They weren't planning to win. They were planning to erase. And that meant if I didn't move next, there wouldn't be a story left to tell. I shut the laptop and unplugged the router. It wasn't panic. It was instinct. You don't argue with a fire once it's in the walls. You cut oxygen. I drove to the office downtown where the company kept off-site backups, the kind nobody thinks about until something goes wrong. I still had access. Emily had never cared how things worked, only that they did. By the time she realized what I was doing, it was already too late to stop. The backups were intact. Everything she was trying to erase was still there, frozen in time like fingerprints in wet cement. I copied what mattered. Not everything. Just enough. Patterns. Timelines. Proof that couldn't be explained away as misunderstanding or emotional confusion. When I got home, my sister called. She asked why Emily had shown up at her place unannounced, demanding to see the kids. I told her not to let Emily in. I hated myself for saying it, but I meant it. This wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about containment. Emily left my sister a voicemail later. I listened to it once. She sounded frantic, saying I was unstable, saying I was trying to turn everyone against her, saying she was afraid of what I might do next. She cried at the end. Real crying this time. Or maybe just better acting. I saved the message. That night, my lawyer called me at home, voice tight. He said Ryan had retained a firm with a reputation for aggression. He said they'd already floated the idea that I was harassing Emily's workplace, that my behavior bordered on coercive. He told me to be careful. I told him I already was. The next morning, I was served papers at work. Emergency motion. Temporary orders. Emily was asking for exclusive use of the house, claiming emotional distress and fear for her safety. The language was clean, clinical, designed to make me look like a threat without ever accusing me of anything concrete. I went to the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror for a long time. I looked normal. That was the problem. Normal men don't get the benefit of the doubt when someone decides to rewrite the story. I called my lawyer. He told me not to go home. So I went home anyway. Emily was there, standing in the living room like she owned the air. Ryan wasn't with her, but his influence was everywhere. Her posture, her words, the confidence that didn't belong to her. She told me I was scaring her. She told me I was obsessed. She told me she'd tried to be reasonable and I'd forced her hand. She said this could all stop if I just agreed to counseling and boundaries in time. I asked her if Ryan had written that speech. She slapped me. It wasn't hard. It wasn't dramatic. It was impulsive, the kind of mistake people make when they forget they're being watched. I didn't touch her. I stepped back and said nothing. She froze the second she realized what she'd done. I picked up my phone and took a picture of her hand still raised, her face twisted between anger and fear. Then I walked out. An hour later, my lawyer called again. He was smiling when he spoke. He told me the emergency motion had just lost its teeth. He told me to keep everything. And then he said something that finally made the shape of this clear. Daniel, he said, they're not trying to protect themselves anymore. They're trying to discredit you before the truth lands. I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot and watched people push carts like nothing in the world was breaking. I understood then that this wasn't a divorce. It was a race. And the finish line wasn't court. It was whoever got believed first. The next week moved fast and slow at the same time. Emily stopped calling. That worried me more than the threats. Silence meant advice. It meant she'd been told to shut up and let other people do the talking for her. Ryan disappeared completely. No texts. No drive-bys. No late-night posturing. Men like him don't vanish unless they're building something. I stayed visible. That was intentional. I went to work. I picked up groceries. I met my lawyer in public places. I didn't drink. I didn't isolate. I made myself boring in all the ways that matter when someone's trying to paint you as unstable. 2 days later, HR called me again. This time the tone was different. Careful, but not cold. They asked if I'd be willing to submit a sworn statement. They asked if I had any additional documentation that showed a pattern of behavior beyond my marriage. I said yes. I brought everything. Not just what Emily had sent or deleted, but what she'd forwarded without thinking, what Ryan had CC'd her on by accident, what expense reports quietly confirmed. I didn't editorialize. I didn't tell a story. I let timestamps speak. The woman across from me didn't react much, but her jaw tightened once. That was enough. That afternoon, my lawyer forwarded me a notice. Ryan had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. No announcement. No explanation. Just gone. Emily broke her silence that night. She sent a long email. Not angry. Not apologetic. Strategic. She said she felt betrayed by both of us. She said Ryan had manipulated her. She said she'd been vulnerable and taken advantage of. She said she needed space to heal and hoped I could eventually forgive her for the confusion she'd caused. Confusion. I read it twice, then forwarded it to my lawyer without replying. An hour later, she sent another message, shorter this time, asking if we could talk privately, without lawyers, without recordings, like two people who once loved each other. I didn't respond. The next morning, my sister called again. Emily had shown up early, crying, saying she just wanted to see the kids, that she missed them so badly it hurt to breathe. My sister asked me what to do. I told her to keep the door closed. That was the hardest sentence I've ever said. By the end of the week, the tone shifted again. Emily's lawyer reached out with a proposal. Cooperative separation. Shared custody. No fault language. A clean break if we could agree not to pursue claims tied to workplace misconduct or marital waste. I read it slowly. They weren't asking for peace. They were asking me to stop. I met my lawyer that night. He told me we were in a strong position. He told me to think about the kids, about how long this could drag on, about the cost of continuing to push. I told him I was thinking about the kids. That was why I couldn't stop. Because one day they'd ask what happened. And I refused to be the man who said nothing because silence was easier. The following Monday, Ryan's firm filed a motion of their own. Not against me. Against Emily. They were distancing themselves. Alleging she'd misrepresented facts. That she'd acted independently. That any professional overlap had been consensual and limited. They were cutting her loose. She called me that night from a number I didn't recognize. Her voice wasn't controlled anymore. It was cracked, raw, stripped of rehearsals. They're blaming me, she said. All of it. I didn't say anything. She told me HR had suspended her too. that coworkers wouldn't look at her, that Ryan had stopped answering her calls, that she'd given everything up for someone who'd already rewritten her out of his life. I listened. That was all. At the end, she asked me if I'd planned this, if I'd set it all up from the start. I thought about the calendar, the lies, the way she'd looked at me like an obstacle. No, I said. You did. She started to cry again, louder now, desperate, asking me what she was supposed to do. I closed my eyes and felt nothing. Because for the first time since this began, the balance had shifted completely. She wasn't standing between two men anymore. She was standing alone. And I knew the next part wouldn't be about exposure or leverage or strategy. It would be about consequences. And they were just starting to catch up to her. Emily moved into a short-term rental across town. I knew because she told the kids during a supervised call, her voice bright and false, describing it like an adventure. New place, new start. She didn't mention that the lease was month to month, or that she'd sold her car to cover the deposit, or that the job she'd built her identity around had quietly removed her access badge. I kept my routine. School drop-offs, homework, dinner at the same table every night. The kids asked where Mom was. I told them she was figuring things out. I didn't lie, but I didn't explain. Some truths are too heavy to hand to children. The court scheduled a temporary custody hearing. Emily's lawyer asked for delays. Mine didn't object. Time wasn't helping her anymore. Ryan resurfaced in the news before he resurfaced in my life. Not by name, not yet, but the industry chatter moved fast. A senior manager placed on leave. An internal investigation expanding. Multiple complaints. The kind of rumors that don't die once they're fed. Emily called me after she saw it. She said people were asking questions. She said she felt exposed. She said she didn't recognize herself anymore. I asked her what she expected. She said she thought Ryan would protect her. That was the moment I understood how deeply she'd misread the situation from the start. She thought power was loyalty. She thought attention was safety. She never understood that men like Ryan don't protect. They redirect damage. A week later, HR finalized their findings. Ryan was terminated. No statement. No farewell email. Just gone. His LinkedIn profile went dark within hours. Emily lost her job the same day. She showed up at the house that evening without warning. No lawyer. No anger. Just hollow. She stood on the porch like a guest, waiting for permission. I stepped outside so the kids wouldn't hear. She told me she'd made a mistake. That she'd confused being desired with being valued. That she'd believed things about me that weren't true because it made leaving easier. She said she wanted to come home, to rebuild, to prove she could be the woman I deserved. I looked at her and tried to remember when I'd last felt safe with her. I couldn't. I told her the house wasn't her home anymore. She asked if this was my revenge. No, I said. This is the end. She dropped to sit on the step, hands shaking, saying she had nowhere to go, that she'd burned every bridge, that everyone she trusted had disappeared. I told her she'd mistaken convenience for loyalty and chaos for freedom. She asked me if I felt good about this. I thought about the nights I'd waited, the questions I'd swallowed, the way she'd rewritten me into something small so she could step over me without guilt. I feel finished, I said. The custody hearing came a week later. Emily didn't look prepared. She looked tired. The judge asked questions. Emily stumbled. Dates didn't line up. Stories shifted. The emails filled the gaps. Temporary custody was granted to me. Emily cried in the hallway afterward, asking if I'd testify against her if it went further. I told her I already had. That night, alone in the house after the kids were asleep, I opened my phone and saw a new message request. Ryan. One line. You think this is over. It's not. I stared at it for a long time, then locked the phone and set it down. Because I knew something he didn't. He'd lost his job, his reputation, his leverage. And men like him don't threaten unless they still think they have something left to take. I just hadn't figured out yet what he planned to try. And that made the silence after the message louder than anything he could have said. Ryan didn't make another threat. That was the mistake. If he'd kept texting, kept pushing, I could have tracked the pattern, anticipated the angle. Silence meant he was either gone for good or doing something that didn't require my reaction. Men like him don't disappear quietly. They regroup. 3 days later, I found out how. My lawyer called me first thing in the morning. He didn't waste words. He told me Ryan had filed a civil complaint. Defamation. Interference with employment. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. The language was heavy, dramatic, designed to sound righteous. Ryan was positioning himself as a victim of a jealous husband who couldn't accept a modern relationship and lashed out when rejected. I asked him one question. Did he attach evidence? My lawyer paused. Not much. Mostly character statements. A narrative. That told me everything. Ryan wasn't trying to win in court. He was trying to poison the well. By noon, the rumors started. Subtle at first. A former colleague texting to ask if everything was okay. Another saying they'd heard things. Nothing specific. Just concern. That's how reputations start to rot. Not with accusations, but with questions. Emily called me that night. She sounded panicked again. She said Ryan's lawyer had contacted her, asking her to sign an affidavit. She said they promised to help her regain custody if she supported his version of events. She said she didn't know what to do. I believed her. For the first time in a while, I believed her fear was real. I asked her what the affidavit said. She told me it claimed I'd been controlling for years, that I monitored her communications, that I'd threatened her career, that Ryan had tried to de-escalate, but I'd become obsessed. I closed my eyes. I asked her if it was true. She didn't answer. That silence told me more than any confession could have. I told her if she signed it, I would never speak to her again outside a courtroom. Not about the kids. Not about logistics. Nothing. Every word would go through lawyers. She cried. She said she was scared. She said she didn't have money, didn't have work, didn't have anyone left. She said Ryan was her only chance to survive this. There it was. Survival. I told her she'd already made her choice once. I hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from anger. From calculation. Ryan was betting on chaos. On exhaustion. On the idea that I'd eventually settle just to make it stop. He didn't understand that this was the cleanest my head had ever been. The next morning, I did something I'd been holding back on purpose. I authorized my lawyer to release everything. Not selectively. Not strategically. Everything. The emails. The messages. The hotel receipts. The internal warnings. The timeline that showed Ryan pursuing Emily while overseeing her advancement. The attempts to delete records. The intimidation texts. All of it, packaged cleanly and sent to the right places. HR, legal, compliance, and yes, the court. By afternoon, Ryan's lawyer requested an emergency conference. By evening, Emily texted me a single sentence. He says you went too far. I didn't reply. The next day, Ryan's complaint was amended. Claims softened. Language adjusted. Suddenly, it wasn't about defamation anymore. It was about misunderstanding. Miscommunication. Hurt feelings. That shift told me he'd seen something he didn't expect. My lawyer called me late that night. Voice low, almost impressed. Daniel, he said, he's in trouble. Real trouble. The kind that doesn't end with a settlement. I sat in the dark living room and thought about how this had started. A missing calendar. A name said too casually. A woman who thought honesty meant consequence-free confession. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done reacting. Because now Ryan wasn't trying to hurt me. He was trying to save himself. And when men like him start doing that, they don't just fall. They drag everyone who helped them down too. Including the woman who thought she'd been chosen. And I knew the final part of this wouldn't be loud or dramatic. It would be quiet. Permanent. And there would be no one left to blame but themselves. The silence hit harder than any scream. By the time I walked into the courthouse, I already knew the outcome. Not because I'd won, not because anyone had declared it, but because the truth doesn't bend. It just waits until everyone else trips over their lies. Emily sat on the bench, eyes red, hands twisting a small piece of paper. Ryan was nowhere in sight. His absence wasn't a bluff. It was a retreat, a surrender to the avalanche he had ignored for months. I watched her shrink under the weight of her choices. The look she gave me wasn't guilt. Not exactly. It was the cold recognition that she had gambled with lives. Hers, mine, the kids, and lost. The judge didn't need a long speech. Evidence spoke louder than lawyers, louder than sobs or excuses. Every document, every timestamp, every message I had carefully preserved for months painted the truth in stark black and white. By the time the gavel struck, Emily's fate, and Ryan's, was sealed. Custody granted in my favor, restraining orders quietly attached to Ryan, legal protections that would make sure neither of them could harm my family again. Quiet justice, absolute and final. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I didn't feel relief. I felt the hollow, precise calm of someone who had watched chaos try to tear apart everything he loved and then, quietly, dismantled it before it could. I walked out of that courtroom like I had walked into a storm months ago, only this time, the storm was gone. The air smelled different, clean, heavy with the promise of order restored. My kids were waiting, their little faces unaware of how close they had come to losing everything. I held them, one after the other, letting them fill the spaces fear had carved into my chest. No phone calls, no messages, no sudden appearances. Ryan vanished from our lives entirely, his threats now meaningless echoes. Emily didn't try to contact me again, and I didn't reach out. Her betrayal had cost her more than she realized. I didn't feel victorious. I felt intact, complete. The world had tried to burn me down, and I had not just survived. I had rebuilt. Every lie, every deceit, every cruel manipulation had collapsed under the weight of truth and patient, calculated resolve. As I closed the door to my home that night, my reflection caught in the window. Tired eyes, yes, but unbroken. A man who had been tested, who had felt every sharp edge of betrayal, and who had, at last, drawn the lines that would protect what mattered most. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It was precise. And in that quiet, I finally exhaled. Because I had endured. I had survived. And nothing, no one, would ever threaten my family again. The story ended not with chaos, but with control, and with the cold, undeniable satisfaction of a life reclaimed.